Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be doing a review of Zack Snyder's Justice League. Not so much a review as it is a discussion. I prefer to call it that. I had some intention of actually doing a live reaction to this, but I love you, Zack. I do, but it's 4 hours. It's 4 hours. So here we are, just doing it in this format instead. So I'm just going to be giving my thoughts, and I want to hear your thoughts on the film as well. Let's get started. Now, going into this, one of the concerns I actually did have, not so much for myself, but with all the hype and anticipation going in for this film was that a lot of viewers went in, or I felt as though they were going in with the assumption that the issues that plagued the DCEU began with Justice League, where in fact it actually began with BVS, right? No, the at the very top of that list, a lot of the criticisms that people had with BVS was that too much was being done too fast, and we saw that towards the very end of BVS, where they were quickly trying to introduce some characters. Aquaman, Wonder Woman played a small role there, but the Flash. They were trying to pull in a lot of these characters, and I felt as though even with that film, as much as I liked it, so let me just put that out there. I mean, Man of Steel for me without a doubt one of my favorite comic book films since the Nolan trilogy. I enjoy the Marvel films to some extent, but they're after a while they become a bit formulaic, and so Man of Steel was, at the time when it was released, it was just so vastly different, and I absolutely loved what Zack did, especially the reimagining to some extent how we viewed Krypton, and how Clark's past was handled as well. So I absolutely loved it when it came out, because it was just so dramatically different from what was being released at the time. So I loved Man of Steel. I thought BVS had the potential to be just as good, but it was clear at that point that the response by the studio with how Man of Steel didn't perform to their expectations was, we need to catch up, and we need to fit in all these things as quickly as possible. And you could clearly see that see what was happening there. Going in for BVS, I liked it a bit, but people had issues with the pacing. I did watch the extended cut afterwards, and it improved to some extent, but the issue was still that there was just too much happening. It should have been a Batman and Superman film, and we're going to be touching on that as we go through point by point, because there is some relevance to how BVS was done, and in contrast to how this Justice League film was done as well. So I'm going to be starting off with the characters first, and give my thoughts on how they were portrayed. Now, I will say, I'm not an avid comic book reader. I do read from time to time, but my main source, for any depiction for any of these characters on screen is the Justice League animated series, and Justice League Unlimited. Again, some comic book knowledge, but I grew up watching Justice League, and I absolutely loved it. So whenever these characters are portrayed on screen, those are the figures that I use to compare them to. So you may not agree with that. You may have met different variations of the characters. For the most part, they don't deviate too far from the Justice League versions, I don't believe, even in the comics. Very interested to see how how everyone feels about how these characters were imagined in Zack Snyder's Justice League here. Now, first off, one of the biggest surprises for me, was actually the revelation for the Martian Manhunter. I sort of knew it was coming, because there's been some speculation about his being introduced here, and that the general would have been the Martian Manhunter, because he was it was prominent in Man of Steel, especially towards the very end, with his interaction with Clark, and he was. It was in a few scenes with Lois in BVS as well, so it was great to see that revelation. And I mean, that is simultaneously one of the things I loved about this film, and disliked at the same time, because the things I loved the most we got the least of, which was, Martian Manhunter, Darkseid, the Sod, Granny Goodness, just more Apocalypse, and we didn't get an entirely large amount of screen time with that. So that was a bit disappointing, but hopefully, I mean, if this does well enough, I suppose perhaps Zach will, maybe be able to finish his story, but perhaps not. And I'll get into that a bit more towards the end with my conclusion about what the future is, or what my suggestions are for the DCU going forward. No, that aside, Cyborg. Um, and I know there's been quite a bit of, controversy with some, Cyborg and various studio heads over at Warner Brothers, and what his experience has been there on set, and some of the things that weren't so pleasant. So I don't know what his future holds for the BCEU as a whole, should it continue, but I do have to give it to him for his performance in this film, because I'm not saying that, I think everyone did a fairly good job in the film, but Cyborg stood out to me in terms of, he, perhaps it was because he was given, it was in certain positions where we got to see range relationship between him and his father. He just had a lot more leeway to actually show us all he had to give, and his performance, when you see him before the incident, and then when you see him after the incident, and he's now, his behavioral patterns are a bit more robotic, and that to suggest that he's now cyborg. He just did a great job with his performance in this series, so I got to give it to him for that. I did have some questions, and again, as I've said before, my knowledge about a lot of these characters stem from cartoons, not necessarily the comics, although I do read comics for every now and then. But I knew Cyborg mostly from Teen Titans. Now, I did not go in expecting Cyborg to be saying booyah, and despite knowing him from Teen Titans, because I do know this is not that Cyborg. They've reimagined the character, a New 52, and this is just, he's had several iterations, and they don't all come down to just Teen Titans, so I didn't go in expecting him to be the exact same character. His appearance in this film was significantly better than the previous one. I'm not sure if perhaps they had more time to polish this, the VFX before this was released, as opposed to the other, but he definitely looked a lot better here. I'm not sure if there was a scene in the film where he got into some trouble in school. His mother visited, and the principal was talking to her, and she said that the principal said that he hacked the school's computers to change grades for a classmate who was going through some difficult time. But I don't recall Saber actually being a hacker, or being that computer savvy in any of his portrayals. But again, I don't know all of them, so I could be wrong. But I've always felt it was a bit more interesting that he wasn't the computer nerd, if that's what they were hinting at, because that's something that he would know with his new, the situation he's now found himself in. It's something that he would have normally have been averse to it, but it's something that he now has to learn to do, and that feels a bit more interesting as a character to me than he was always a hacker, and he just has an easy access now because of this computer. Because he's now a computer. So I thought it a bit odd that they would throw that in. Why change him? Just I would have preferred if he remained a football player, and it adds an element to an element of depth to his character that he's never done any of this before. But they threw that in there. It kind of threw me because I've never heard the character being the suggestion that the character has been a hacker before, but it's a change, I suppose. And something that I did notice for all these characters going through, I'm not sure if this is just the director wanting to take a different direction from what the comics have traditionally done, or animation has traditionally done, in terms of how the characters are represented here. They keep referring to Cyborg as the cyborg, or a cyborg. They don't just say cyborg, which is how I'm accustomed to the character being called. The same thing was actually done with Aquaman, when I think Bruce visited that village, or perhaps he was speaking to Alfred, but he referred to him as the Aquaman, and I'm not sure if it's something that maybe I'm over analyzing that aspect of it, but it's just a bit odd that they're referring to the characters by those names. Um, the naming is definitely something that I would have liked for them to have represented a bit better, because I initially I thought that perhaps it was just those two, but then towards the end there, the same thing happened with Martian Manhunter, and we did see this. I recall when BVS ended, that was a part of the criticism that the film actually got. The fact that all the characters' symbols were already known. The when Bruce hacked into Lex's computers and got the files, and he saw a video recording of the flat of Barry saving someone in a store, but it had all the symbols for all the characters already, and it was like, okay, where would Lex have gotten this from? Where would he have gotten the Atlantean symbol from? Barry's symbol, Wonder Woman. So, and the same thing came back to me here. I mean, the Martian Manhunter speaking to Batman at the end, and he says, they call me the Martian Manhunter. I mean, who calls you that? No one knows you exist here. So I felt as though enough care wasn't gone into it. Perhaps that was, I suspect this was a scene that was added after the fact, because you can clearly tell. I've seen Ben Affleck in a few interviews, and he's lost a significant amount of weight versus what he looked like in the when the first cut was released. So that scene there towards the end was clearly something that they recently shot, so you can tell there's a difference there. But I'm not sure who calls him the Martian Manhunter when he's been in hiding. And of course, Bruce didn't seem all that surprised to see him, which was even more surprising to me, because he's hidden himself away all this time, and he's just chosen to reveal himself. But for the most part, I love the Martian Manhunter's role here. I just would have wanted to see more of it. With Wonder Woman, I've got to say, and towards the end of the discussion about the characters, I'll touch on this point a bit more. But um, I absolutely loved the opening scene with her. I think they had a scene with each character. They showed Barry's, and they showed Wonder Woman as well, trying to stop some terrorists from killing a bunch of people. And that scene there with Wonder Woman, I'm going to talk about Wonder Woman and the Flash, simultaneously for a bit, because there's some overlap in terms of what I liked and what I didn't love so much about how they were portrayed. For Wonder Woman, for the most part, that scene where she's blocking the guns, I absolutely loved that. And this is where I wished that DC or Warner Bros. Hadn't rushed this project as fast as they had, because you can clearly see there are moments where directors could have learned how to represent certain characters after seeing that film. The very first Wonder Woman film, absolutely love that as well. Second to Man of Steel, that was probably my favorite in the DCEU. But her movement here in this scene where she was saving all the hostages, and in how she saw the bullets and how she blocked the bullets and how she was moving, I absolutely love that, and I would have wanted to see something like that in how she handled herself in No Man's Land in the Wonder Woman film. So that I would have absolutely loved to have seen. So to see it here in this film, and there's a similar scene in Wonder Woman 1984. But if I had to choose between how that was shot and how this was shot, I would have chosen this. And that's not to say that there aren't things in Wonder Woman that I thought Zack could have borrowed to make this Wonder Woman a hell of a lot better, because there were, so I absolutely love that opening scene with her saving the hostages. I thought in terms of how they handled slowing time down, and how it sped up to block bullets in the very same way that they did in Man of Steel with Fiora Ull or Zada, the characters in Man of Steel. I love how Zack shoots the character is moving really fast. It's just I can follow it. It breaks within frames so that you can actually follow the character's movements, and it's not just a blur. But it's just fantastic. It's just fantastic, and it's my favorite thing to see in the film. And that brings me to the Flash, who look I think I'm of two minds where the Flash is concerned, because I mentioned before how slow how speed is handled in this film, and how Zack has handled this in the past with Man of Steel. But when it comes to the Flash, it's strange. I would have wanted to see the Flash behave in the same manner that that the Kryptonians did in Man of Steel. But here in this film, and what I see where they try to apply his speed force in helping them to achieve certain things throughout this film. But sometimes I feel as though less is sometimes more. The lightning surrounding Barry all the time, to me, feels something of a distraction. And when I think about how he's moving now, it reminds me a lot about Quicksilver in in the MCU. Well, it was not the MCU, maybe in the MCU now, but in the X-Men films, how everything else around him slows down and he's moving at normal pace. I don't think it suited this this film here, because how we've seen the other characters move. It's just a bit odd to see. Okay, Wonder Woman is moving fast, and you see how she's moving, but then the Flash, who's supposedly the fastest of them all, but then it's flipped, and everyone else is slowed, and then he starts to move. But I just don't get the impression that he's moving fast. And when I think about the Flash, I want to see the speedster. I want to feel as though he's moving really fast. And I know perhaps that's just a personal thing for me, because of how I always perceive the character. But I didn't enjoy how he was moving here. I would have preferred if there actually were a few shots where you do actually see him move that way. But I felt as though the slow motion was used a bit too much throughout the film, and it isn't just where the Flash is concerned. It's actually done a few times, and oddly, I mean, again, I'm no stranger to Zack's films, so I do know he uses slow motion quite a bit, but oftentimes it's done sparingly. But I suppose because in this film there are so many characters, these are gods after all, and superhuman, super fast characters, that there may be a need to actually do that, to put focus on certain things that they're actually doing. But I feel as though it's not absolutely necessary, especially for someone like the Flash. I would have just loved to see him moving in the way that we saw Diana move, or the way that we saw the Kryptonians move back in Man of Steel. I mean, in certain moments, I would have loved to see. I don't mind it, because in the scene where he saves I am blanking on her name, his love interest in this, and from the car crash, that would be fine, where the time slowed and we see what he's doing before saving her. But then when there's a crowded scene happening and all the characters are there, I don't think it's necessary to have that slow motion to show exactly that. So there are moments where I felt the Flash's portrayal was done great, but then there are other moments where I'm like, why are we slowing down here? I don't think we need to slow down here. There's nothing here that we need to really focus on, you know. But it works in some instances, and in others, for me, it kind of takes away from from what the Flash is supposed to be. The relationships throughout, I will say I do enjoy the Flash and Aquaman quite a bit. They don't have a whole lot, but when they do, it's hilarious. And the one relationship here that I wanted to see the most, that wasn't front and center, but we did get a hint of it, was between Bruce and Diana. Again, going back to my Justice League love, Justice League animated and unlimited love. That is something that's portrayed in that animated series, where Bruce and Diana eventually become a couple, and it's done so organically. But again, I think the thing that affects this film in the same way that it affects BVS is that there's too much happening, and too much needs to be done at once. So there was never enough time. Like, as much as I would have wanted to see that relationship grow. I love Steve Trevor, don't get me wrong, but he's dead. You're dead, Steve. She has to move on. But as much as I would have wanted to see that relationship, I understand that there's so much going on that I was, after a while, I just accepted that, okay, this is neither the time nor place, and it really isn't. It's just something that I would love to have seen come to fruition eventually. And again, had we had the opportunity to have perhaps two or three films, maybe that would have eventually happened. But they did have a moment there, when they were reviewing something on the monitor, and they reached for, I don't know, the keyboard or the mouse, and their hands touched, and they kind of brushed it off. But that is the relationship that I always hope for between these characters. And I've never loved the relationship between Superman and Wonder Woman. I've seen it a few times in the animated films that DC puts out, but I do not like it. It's just, I don't get it. There's nothing there that tells me that these two are compatible in any way, and it just feels a bit more forced. But nonetheless, again, I love the hint that I got here of it, and it just gives me hope that perhaps someday, one day, we'll actually get that in live action. There were some moments between Arthur and Diana, of course, that representing their two groups of people. And if you've seen Justice League, War, or Flashpoint, I believe Diana mentioned a war between her people and the Atlanteans. Obviously, it wouldn't have been the same war in Flashpoint, but their people have been at odds for quite some time. And it's a foreshadowing to things that could be possible if there's a Flashpoint film. I know they haven't done the Flash's film as yet, and I don't know if we're going to be getting one at this stage. I mean, I get into it a bit more towards the end about what the state of the DCU at the moment, and what I think they should do. But it would have been fantastic if we had gotten a Flashpoint film where we could see that war between the Atlanteans and the Amazon. That would have been pretty fantastic. No, I did mention before that, um, had there been a continuation from Man of Steel, and there was a sequence of films that followed, a Batman film, an Aquaman film, a Wonder Woman film, that I thought this film could have been so much better. And I gave an example before about how Wonder Woman as a character would have been treated in that film, and how Zack could have borrowed some elements from that film to portray the character here. No, one of the perfect examples of that is actually with Arthur, with Aquaman. And you'll notice how vibrant in James Wan's Aquaman that he released, how vibrant the Atlanteans world actually is versus what we see here. Now, I know a lot of the criticisms that Zack Snyder got for this film was that everything, people said everything looked a bit too dark, and the colors looked washed out. Now, there are areas where I think that works, and somewhere I don't think it should be applied, and that's why I mentioned Aquaman. Right now, when I watch Man of Steel, and when I look at Apocalypse here, I feel it's perfectly suited for the other worlds that look a bit more alien in their appearance. I absolutely loved the opening scene to Man of Steel, where we got to see Krypton, and how their adornment, how their clothing, armor, everything looks and feels alien. I absolutely love that. That's one of my favorite things about Man of Steel, is that it's very much an alien story, an alien invasion. Just with Superman and Supermen and women. So I absolutely love that there, and I think for Krypton, I think for Kal-El's suit, I think that aesthetic works. I think for Darkseid and for Apocalypse, I think that works brilliantly. But I don't believe we need to see. I don't believe it should be applied to everyone else, and that's my criticism as far as the appearances go. Um, had Aquaman's film come out before this film, it would have been the perfect opportunity. Had it followed Man of Steel, it would have been the perfect opportunity for Zack to perfect Aquaman's, demeanor, his appearance, because he could have seen what James Wan did in terms of, especially with the underwater effects, and rather than having them be underwater, he used technology to make it appear as though they do. And so that would, because there are moments where I'm watching this and I see Mira create the bubbles underwater to speak, and I think to myself, yeah, this James Wan's idea of how to portray that was a lot better. But and again, that's where this that's the drawback of rushing towards having these characters introduced too early, and that's why it's important to have different creative minds come on board and to see what they have to offer, and you can pull from those different elements and improve on what you're going to present. So had Wonder Woman been done first, had Aquaman been done first, and we would have gotten an underwater scene that looks a bit more reflective of James's Aquaman, and that would have been fantastic. So there are moments where I see that and I wonder, okay, this could have been so much more improved on, had they followed a sequence of films before before bringing the Justice League together, because this was far too early, and this was far too early. So Aquaman was definitely one of them, and I mean, as I said before, I loved Diana's portrayal here, but there are moments where perhaps it's her armor, and how she fights here. There are ups and downs, because there are some that I absolutely love here and I would have wanted to see in Wonder Woman, and then there are also some that I would have wanted to be carried over from Wonder Woman and seen here, especially where the shield is concerned. And I've heard a few persons um, um, just express that they have some preference to her just fighting with the sword versus her fighting with the shield. I don't mind it. Um, I suppose it's just that without the shield, it would give her more freedom to actually use things like the lasso, or perform other movements that she otherwise can't with a shield in hand. It's quite interesting to actually see that. I don't think she has a sword anymore. I think that was destroyed in the first Wonder Woman movie. So, yeah, so there are definitely some examples there where I felt as though, okay, this would have been so much better if it had followed a sequence of films, and if Warner Brothers hadn't rushed and we gotten Aquaman before any Justice League. We got Cyborg, we got Aquaman, we got Flash, all of that before, and then we would follow, and the directors could learn from each other, and they'd have an idea as to what direction to take the characters, because it would suggest that here in this film, that Arthur hasn't reclaimed the throne of Atlantis just yet, and it puts the film in a precarious position, because it now means, okay, he just saved the world, but then if you're following the sequence and he goes back to Aquaman, why is it he's in that position versus where he's at the end of this series? So that becomes a bit odd, especially with his relationship with Mira. So there are definitely a few of those, but for the most part, I mean, I think the characters, they've done the best with what they had to work with at the time, and I mean, while I think a lot of there were a lot of reshoots and additions, for the most part, I think this was in large part already done before any of those other films were actually released. So there was nothing Zack could actually do at this stage, but just improve on what was already there. And finally, we get down to Batman himself, the Dark Knight, and without a doubt, my favorite character, my favorite comic book character of all time, of course, is Batman. And when you know Ben Affleck was cast as Batman initially, I wasn't as apprehensive as most people were. I'd seen him in a few films, and he's an Oscar winning writer as well. So he's been around, and he's shown his range as an actor, as a writer, and I'm one of the few people actually who very likely saw the Daredevil film and thought it was actually pretty good. I mean, it wasn't the best film I'd ever seen, But sorry, it wasn't the best film I'd ever seen, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. And even watching the Netflix Daredevil, I prefer the suit in Ben's Daredevil film to the one that we actually get in the series. And I thought it looked more accurate to the character. So I quite enjoyed him in that. I've seen several of his films, and I think he's a brilliant actor. And without a doubt, he's the best portrayal of Batman, not Batman, but Bruce Wayne that I've seen so far. And I would wager to say Batman as well. But his Bruce Wayne, at the very least in BVS, it's changed somewhat here, and that's I'm gonna get to that in a bit. But his Bruce Wayne in BVS was very reminiscent, of the Bruce Wayne that I've known. I saw the original Batman animated series growing up. I absolutely love that, and what I loved him as well in the Justice League animated series. And while people have their favorite Batman, mine is definitely still Kevin Conroy because I've just enjoyed him in those films, and I believe he did voice the Batman in the Justice League animated series as well. So that is my favorite Batman, not necessarily a live action one. If I had to choose a live action one, it would most likely be Ben Affleck because I feel as though he's the closest to those characters that I've seen, growing up. I love the Nolan films, I absolutely do, but Batman is not my favorite thing in any of those films, and which is odd, considering, his name is in the films, but yeah, I mean, I love those films because in their entirety, but not necessarily because of Batman in the film. So he's the closest one as far as Bruce Wayne, an accurate representation of Bruce Wayne, especially in BVS, where I just remember that scene where he said even if there's just a 1% chance that Superman could be a threat, we have to take it as an absolute certainty. And that was just Batman for me because he's always calculating. Even if there's a slight risk, it's something that has to be factored in. So I absolutely loved his portrayal as Bruce Wayne there. But I felt as though there was a significant character shift here in this film for Bruce Wayne. And it's mentioned quite a bit. He has some discussions with Alfred about faith, and he said to Alfred, I believe, something to the effect of he's acting on faith, not logic anymore. And that for me was I'm like that's I don't know, it doesn't sound like Batman to me because that is what Batman has always been about, looking at things objectively, by the numbers, logically. This is what needs to happen. Um, so I mean, in terms of what his objective is here, reviving Superman, that is something I can see Batman doing because he knows a fight is coming. But Batman would justify that in his mind in that okay, this isn't about faith, this is about us needing to win, Earth needing to win, and Earth needing him, needing Superman to actually be victorious. So the line alone where he says, yeah, I'm acting solely on faith alone. It just didn't feel like the Batman that I've known, and I understand that there's some bias on my part because I know that this is a Batman who's been 20 years in the business, and perhaps logic has not always been on his side, and the mistakes that he has made have caught up to him. And even when this version of Batman was introduced, and that was the explanation that I believe Zack gave, that this is a worn Batman who's lost a lot. I accepted that because I felt it was a natural progression from the Batman that I've known. That okay, at a certain point he would just, he's become frustrated. I believe there was a line in BVS. He was speaking to Alfred and he says, 20 years. I forget what exactly he said, but he was saying 20 years and how many good guys are left. Because he's seen the good ones come and go, and I can see this Batman or the BVS Batman being a natural progression from the one that I've known because all it takes is one bad day. Um, but this Batman here it strikes me as noticeably different from the Batman that was in BVS, and I suppose the justification was that his change happened with Superman's death, and that was the other thing that I felt needed more time to feel a bit more organic was his relationship with Clark. For the majority of this film, he was obsessed with bringing Clark back. He said he gave him his word, but the way in which they became friends that quickly just didn't feel organic to me. And don't get me wrong, I love Bruce and Clark's relationship. Again, it's something that happened in the Justice League animated series, and they didn't love each other at the beginning, and that is similar to how they didn't here, but for different reasons, of course. Um, not least of which because Bruce was dating Lois. Well, I'm not sure they were dating, as I think it may have just been one date, but Clark got jealous, immediately about that one. But yeah, the relationship started off rocky in the way that it started here as well, and Bruce not entirely trusting Clark because of all that power that he wields. Um, but that animated series went on for several seasons, whereas this is it's just been one movie apart. So the relationship for me, I felt as though it needed a bit more time. I want them to have that relationship because their relationship is one of my favorites, my absolute favorites. I recently was rewatching The Dark Knight and the Frank Miller's animated adaptation, and just to see where they've gotten to in their old age, or mostly Bruce's old age. But it sort of highlights where the relationship begins and ends. They have the utmost respect for each other. Bruce says famously that deep down he's a good person and deep down I'm not, and I want that relationship to feel earned. It felt as though it went a bit too quickly here. I went by a bit too quickly here from one film to the other, and that Bruce is now so devoted. And look, I'm not one of those persons who had an issue with the whole Martha revelation in BVS. I thought that was well placed actually, because in my mind it never occurred to me that their parents had the same name. It just didn't. So watching that on screen for the first time, and he says, wait, and he says, why did you say that name? And Lois says it's his mother, and I'm like, wait a minute. They do have the same name. It just never occurred to me. So I actually quite enjoyed that. I'm not sure why it's a gag for everyone, for a lot of people on the internet, to make a joke about it. It wasn't a joke, and it was I love to see it in the moment that they had that scene, and Bruce was working it through his mind that okay, his name is Martha. Wait, he has a mother, because I've been looking at him as this thing, this alien from another world. So I enjoyed the moment quite a bit, and I wanted their relationship to feel real. But I thought it could have done with a bit more time for that relationship, for that bond to actually grow, for the trust between them to actually grow. So yeah, Batman of Faith. I didn't completely love, because it's not how I'm accustomed to Batman coming to certain conclusions through faith. It's mostly through through logic, and yeah. But again, different interpretation of the character. The only criticism there is that in BVS he seemed to be a completely different character, and then it just flipped a bit too quickly, right? Superman, yeah. Superman in this, I mean, he didn't come into until towards the very end, which was no surprise, because in a way that's what it was in the Whedon cut as well. Um, the the mustache wasn't there. I'm sure that's the thing that everyone will take away from this. The scene where he appears, you can clearly tell they didn't edit any mustache out. I'm not sure if they just had him reshoot the scene, or whatever the situation was, but it wasn't obvious in any of the shots that he had. Something was edited out. His mustache was edited out of the scene. So that's the first I got to give to it. That much looks absolutely better. And that looked much better. No, Superman himself. My hopes for Superman was, and I mean, I didn't know whether that was the direction Zack was going to go with it or not, but I know a lot of people were pissed when he killed Superman in BVS. I actually thought that was where the story needs to go, but I think Superman should have remained dead for at least two Justice League films if there was if that was the intention. I think he came back a bit too quickly. He just died in the last film and he's already back now. But I suspect that had Zack gotten the opportunity to do what he wanted, then this would have been a two-part film, and then Superman would have come in towards the end of the second film, and then fight Darkseid in the third. So him coming back in this film, I know it should have been the second film of a two-part. But I would have left him out of the equation for quite some time. But then again, I would have liked Darkseid to not be here this quickly. Um, so for Superman himself, Henry Cavill, and let me just say for Henry Cavill, I I don't know that Cavill would have been my first pick for Superman, but when he was cast, he blew my expectations out of the way, out of the water, and he quickly became one of my first interpretations of my favorite interpretations of the Superman character. I saw the Reeves films. I've forgotten most of them, if I'm being honest. I never felt as though I could relate to Christopher Reeve's Superman in any way. It was, I don't know, he just felt out of reach. The Brandon Routh Superman films, I know they didn't get a whole lot of love. Um, I like them. I didn't love them. And Superman is a hard character to do. He is. You know, I give this analogy whenever I'm talking to, my friends about comic book characters, but more importantly, whenever the Marvel versus DC argument starts up, the Marvel characters are, they're, for the most part, not all of them, but for the most part, they're men, attempting to strive to be more, to be gods, the Hulk, Iron Man, with the exception of Thor, who's an actual god, but for the most part, they are men trying to be gods. But when it comes to the DC characters and Superman, himself being the beacon for that, he's literally a god, trying to live as a man, and that's the case for a lot of the characters here. The same for, for Barry, the same for Diana, the same for Arthur. They're just trying to find a way to live, amongst men here in this world, and so that makes them a bit more difficult because adapting gods on screen. How do you make them relatable to the everyday man? So, I mean, Superman is the most difficult character to actually write and write well. And this was the first time, Cavill's interpretation of the character or Zack's interpretation of the character is the first time that I've actually felt, because Superman was nowhere near my top five list of comic book characters. Batman is at the top. The Hulk is actually second to him. Not the MCU Hulk. I have an aversion to that Hulk. I'm sorry, but Superman was never in the top five because he's just, I don't know if it's the Boy Scout persona, but he's just never been relatable. But somehow Zack managed to make this Superman relatable, and that's why Man of Steel kind of changed my perception of the character as a whole, because perhaps I just started viewing him as an alien who's here, who's, and it was in part because I suppose Man of Steel and BVS, but it's in part because of the reaction that the world had to Superman, in these films. It wasn't an immediate, okay, he's perfect, he's good, welcome to Earth, Superman. No, he had to earn that trust, and that's realistic. If an alien, lands here, we discover a few years later that, we are not alone, and this person is here, and this person can literally destroy the Earth. Our first reaction is not going to be to welcome him with open arms until we know without a doubt that he's here to help us. So, that depiction of, an imperfect alien, an imperfect character trying to live amongst men, made me appreciate Superman a bit more. So, and here in this film, I mean, I worry about what's gonna happen to him next, because the dream sequence that we see portrays him as not so great later on. But I'm all for Dark Superman, so bring it. I'm ready. Yeah, he didn't have a whole lot of time here. The scene that we got with him being revived, um, I don't know. It comes back to my reservation on the slow motion again for this for that scene. I love the part where the Flash was trying to get behind him, and then Superman begins to turn, and the Flash sees him, and he's he can see me. In that moment, Barry had to have felt some joy, but at the same time, he had to have been scared out of his mind because finally someone would understand, see the world the way that he sees it. And so that could have been some amount of joy for him. But then when he realized that, wait, oh no, he can see me. It means that he's in danger. So I love that moment. But again, it comes. I didn't think it needed to be slowed down. That particular moment, perhaps, but the entire fight didn't need to be slowed. And I think I thought they relied on that. There was a bit too much slow motion happening throughout the film in its entirety. So um, that particular sequence, I thought I would have enjoyed it more if it was done in the way that, in the way that it was handled in Man of Steel when the Kryptonians were going head to head. Everyone there, for the most part, is superhuman, so it's not far fetched that they would be moving pretty fast and they'd be pretty strong, in the way that the Kryptonians are. So, I thought I would have benefited from just from not being from not having so many slow sequences. Um, but yeah, Superman is definitely a highlight. I'm wondering. I don't recall encountering Steppenwolf an awful lot. I've probably seen snippets of him, and I think he's appeared here and there in animated form. But I'm not sure whether his battle with Superman should have ended as quickly as it did. I don't expect him to be as strong as Superman, of course, but I would have liked for him to put up a much better fight. Superman just came in and just literally mopped the floor with him, and yeah, it was over. It was over too soon. So we didn't get a whole lot of Superman. He came in and he just destroyed, and then that was it. There, it was good to see him back, but as I said before, I think it was too soon to actually bring Superman back. He should have remained out of the picture for a bit. But the overarching theme that I've said before is that we got to Darkseid too quickly. So Superman too quickly, yes, but Darkseid should have been removed from the equation a bit longer, and then somewhere later down the line we would be introduced to him. Yeah, so I think I have covered all the characters so far, given my thoughts on them. So we're going to move on to Zack's aesthetic, which is I mentioned it a bit as far as some of the armor and all that that's actually used used on a lot of the characters, the Atlanteans and so on, and how that I think that should have changed to suit each character so that each world looks distinct. And I think in a weird way people had the same challenge with like the Transformers, and the fact that everything looks the same, as though it was just a bunch of machines mashed together fighting. And so you want to have a distinct look for each, for the Atlanteans, for the Amazonians, and Earthings have their own thing, but Darkseid and the Kryptonians can look alien-like. But as I said before, had James Wan's film come out first, I feel the Atlanteans would have looked differently, and so Arthur would have looked differently, and that would have been great. And the same thing for Wonder Woman as well, because her armor is different here, as well as when we do see the Amazonians in the very opening scene, the opening sequence. So they would have looked hella badass because their appearance is noticeably different in the Wonder Woman film as well. So and that's not to say, as I said before, I feel as though Zack's aesthetic works in certain instances, just not in all. And I'm a huge fan of Zack's visual storytelling. As I said, I think a lot of people may have been introduced to Zack from, what is it, Dawn of the Dead. and I've never seen it actually. I may need to watch it before his new Netflix. Is it a film or a series? I forget, but I haven't seen any of his zombie creations as yet. Um, my introduction to Zach was most likely, I probably saw 300 first, but the film that I saw that gave me an accurate representation of how he tells stories was probably Sucker Punch. And interestingly, Sucker Punch is one of those films where I will talk to the most die-hard Zack Snyder fan, and most of them have never seen Sucker Punch, and it's without a doubt one of my favorite films that he has actually done. Now, um, I don't want to call it a guilty pleasure because that suggests that it's not good, and I think it's actually a great film. It's not the best film, but in terms of how he uses stories and to how he uses the visuals and what the persons are imagining inside to tell their stories, I think was just quite fascinating for the girls in the group in the home that they find themselves in. And so that was that was when I saw it, and I was like, okay, I love this. I need to know who made this. I'm like, oh wow, it's the same guy that did 300, and to this day I'm still looking forward to the third 300 film, and I'm baffled as to why that hasn't been made as yet. I If I remember correctly, the second 300 film didn't do as well as the first, but overall they still they were still very profitable. So where's the third 300 film, Zach? Where is it? Where? Um, but yeah, I mean, I'm no stranger to his visual style, and I think it works in several occasions here, but in others, I just feel as though there needs to be a distinction between the different worlds, so to speak. But I will say, as far as how fantastical, and that's one of the challenges I think that this film and the DCU as a whole, has faced, in that they there's an attempt almost to make the characters feel and look a bit more grounded than they need to be. And I continue to raise James Wan's Aquaman because it was of all the DCU films, and not even just the DCU, but of all the comic book films that have been released, of late, all the modern day comic book films, James Wan's Aquaman is the one that comes the closest as far as delivering something that you feel just leapt off the pages of a comic. It was just fantastical, and it wasn't over the top. You just even looking at something like Black Manta and how he was handled, he didn't look goofy at all. So I felt that was the first comic book adaptation that we got that embraced its fantasy elements, and it just embraced the world it was in, and it took itself seriously at the same time. And it worked, and I feel as though some of that needs to be transferred to films like this one in part. There are areas where it does shine, but then there are some where I feel they're trying to make the character feel more grounded rather than just accepting that these are gods, and they don't need it doesn't their actions don't need to look realistic. So a character gets is tossing someone aside or throwing or gets thrown across the room. It needs to look super powerful. And there are instances where it feels as though it's just below where it actually needs to get to, and perhaps Aquaman was able to accomplish that a lot easier because the world in which we were for the most part in that film was underwater, and it added another element to it being something alien like and not so much Earth. So that may have helped, but I definitely love Zach's visual style here. When it comes to the Kryptonians, and when it comes to the dark side, when it comes to the alien aspect of it, I think it works. But I just feel as though he needs to make a distinction between what's Atlantean, because some of the armors they look very familiar. So you'll see the Atlanteans in a particular set of armor, then you go to go to Apocalypse, and the armor that they're wearing there might look similar because it's just metal, pure metal, and metal with spikes, and that's it. So there needs to be a distinction between them. It's not even just to show a difference between the two, but to sort of give them their own piece of the world that they're actually in, to separate them. So I think it would have benefited the lot just to show some separation there. I remember when they showed the scene when Darkseid tried to take over the Earth for the very first time, and in my mind, they were showing, there was a team up between Zeus, his sons, the Amazonians, the Atlanteans, and then there was those who were representing man. But for the most part, if they were all there was nothing separating them, for you to tell them apart. If Zeus didn't start shooting lightnings, you would have thought he was, one of the other two sides. So I think that distinction needs to be there. I think it's just very important so that we can make a distinction to see, how these worlds differ from each other, and that would have serviced the film a whole lot. Now, for the overall the story, for the overarching story for the film, there's nothing surprising here, of course, because we've already seen it, and not much has changed from Whedon's cut, as far as what Steppenwolf was trying to accomplish. So I mean, we got the same backstory with the heroes who forced Darkseid back centuries ago, and Steppenwolf is here to somewhat redeem himself. And so that's very much treading the grounds that we've already seen in the previous film. But with the introduction of the new characters that we didn't see before, the Sad Darkseid, Granny Goodness. The one of the things that was most important here, and it did not disappoint, was the voice for Darkseid. I need to look up who actually voiced the character, because that's always important. If you did not get Darkseid's voice correct, then this film would have been dead to me. Okay, it would have been dead to me. But it did a great job. I'm not sure who the voice actor was. There was one character in particular that I wanted them to cast for Darkseid's voice. But he's much older. He was in Underworld, one of the Lycans in Underworld, the big burly black guy. I don't remember his name, but his voice, he had the voice of thunder. I will need to look that up, but he would have been perfect to voice Darkseid. But nonetheless, this guy did a fantastic job as well. The side sounded pretty cool. We didn't hear much from Granny Goodness, and we only saw her partially. She looked very tall though, and not very old either. Doesn't look much like a granny. She looks like a very attractive granny, and I've never been attracted to Granny Goodness. It's been very confusing watching this. So I've never wanted, not thought, oh hey, Granny Goodness looks very attractive. No. But the casting was real done well for all across the board. But I mean, again, it comes back to what I said before of everything just happening a bit too fast. So overall, I had a discussion with a friend of mine, and I think this was with the first Justice League. I'm not sure if she's seen the second one just yet. But she's someone who's not familiar with comics or any of that, but it's always good to get an impression from someone who is outside of the niche group that you're in, and hear what their thoughts are, what the average audience member thinks. And one of her concerns watching the Justice League film at the time was that she didn't understand how the mother boxes actually work. I think they did a much better job explaining that here in this film, but it was still, again, and I think that is what plagues the Justice League film in its entirety, the notion that this came along too quickly, because I feel we could have told several different stories introducing a mother box in each of those stories, and the mother box having a different purpose in each of those stories. And then when we have Justice League, the revelation can be that all three together have a greater purpose, and this is it. But there was the mother boxes were just in, and if you're not familiar with the DCEU or with DC Comics, and the mother boxes and what they're for and all that, it can all feel a bit overwhelming and confusing, and just to hear those persons express that, it wouldn't have occurred to me that way, but again, it's good to hear from persons who are not are not comic nerds. So yeah, I mean, it was handled a bit better here, but then you have to bear in mind that the mother box was terraforming it was going to terraform the earth in a way that the Kryptonians tried to do in Man of Steel, but then it's also used to to bring Superman back. It's also used to create Cyborg. So it's doing all these things, and for the lay person who doesn't know anything about the mother box, they'll just be wondering what is this and why is it doing all of this, and yeah. One woman gave an explanation that it's somewhere, it's science that you know appears to be magic to some extent. There's no explanation as to what its origins are, and you don't need to go into all of that for this film. It would just been better, I believe, to have several stories introducing each mother box in those. We could have had one in Wonder Woman, and after seeing Wonder Woman 1984, and again, I know I keep saying this, about having the other films come first, but it just appears to be the perfect, setup for all of this to happen. So having watched the Wonder Woman 1984, I think they should do the third Wonder Woman movie purely on Themyscira. Have Diana recover for some unknown reason, and if that had been done, it could have been something to do with one of the mother boxes. Perhaps some god or another attempts to seize it for his own power or something to that effect, and we could have introduced one mother box that way, and then in a separate film, perhaps in the Flash or something, we could have introduced another mother box, and then another Aquaman film we could have introduced the other, and then in the Justice League now we could have said, okay, all three mother boxes come together for this purpose. It's a recurring theme, I know, but the film could have benefited so much from just having that setup, having those revelations happen a bit more organically. We didn't get, we still got that glimpse of that Green Lantern, and his ring shots. I don't think we saw it go out into space, so it's possible that there is a Green Lantern here on Earth. We just didn't never met him or her. But then it could have been one of those stories. So there are several ways in which this could have actually been handled a bit differently. For the closing sequence, there was a lot of interest in seeing Jared Leto come back on board for this project. He's not he's not prominent in this film, but he appears towards the end. And I've got to say, in a weird way, I actually preferred his performance in Suicide Squad, and that's not to say this one was bad. But I feel like they're trying to walk back his performance when I didn't have an issue with his performance. The issue that I had with that version of the Joker was his lines. He just didn't have great lines, but his performance was fine. I know a lot of people had issue with the damaged tattoo on his forehead, but I was fine with that too. Listen, I mean, for those of us who are fans of the DC, of DC and DC Comics, there are various multiverses. There are different versions of every character. I just took it on. I just took it to mean that this is this interpretation of the Joker, who's more of a gangster than anything. And we've seen this before with Jack Nicholson's Joker. I think Cesar Romero to some extent. So it's been done before. This is a bit more hard edged Joker. So he doesn't necessarily need to have the tattoos, but they didn't take away from the performance for me. I got what they were going for. And in truth, I mean, I didn't think Suicide Squad was bad. I just feel the problem that a lot of the DC films have is, in a weird way, they're always trying to save the world. I think for all the films, I mean, I mentioned in terms of aesthetics that they should take a different approach so that there's some distinction between these different characters and their worlds. But they need to take that same approach with the different films as well. I mean, the Suicide Squad at its core is a heist story. Yes, these are super villains and all of that, but it's still a heist story. But in the Suicide Squad film, I felt they went about the whole, uh, she's going to destroy the world situation. But it didn't need to go there. I thought it could have been to steal something heavily guarded or something very simple. It didn't need to go as far as world destruction. And I said it before at the very beginning of this that sometimes less is more. If they stuck to just making it a simple heist story, but have them face some villain at the end, not necessarily an OP villain like the one that we got. And I love her portrayal as the witch, but it didn't need to be a world destruction villain. It could have been handled a bit differently there, but I still enjoy the film quite a bit. Um, so the DCEU can adapt these things, and I think they learned their lesson in part with Shazam. Um, Although there was the seven sins that were released, but it still felt quite personal. In terms of Billy and his siblings, it felt self-contained and like a small story. There weren't news reports all across the world that the world is going to end and this is it. It was just a small story about a boy trying to find a home and protecting these siblings that he's now found. And that story, I felt it was relatable, it was fun, it was funny, and it was just its own thing. It was its own thing. So I think the DCU needs to find its identity there, and give each story their own its own time to develop its own characters and to flesh those characters out without having to try to tie them into some other much bigger story. Aside from the Joker and Bruce's conversation there at the end, we did see where Lex actually broke out of prison. And funny enough, there were when BVS came out, there were a lot of criticisms for Jesse's portrayal of the character, and I didn't dislike his character as Lex Luthor, but here when we had the prison escape and there was a replacement there for Lex, and he while he was making his escape and the prisoner is laughing and ha 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 ha, that felt to me like a Joker moment, and there have been criticisms about that, about his being a bit too Joker like before, and I didn't feel that, but this definitely felt like it was a Joker moment. The Joker. I believe there has been an episode or panels in the comics where the Joker broke out and he left another inmate there, and it doesn't help that he's in Arkham Asylum, and that was one of the things that I didn't feel, and maybe perhaps that falls under the umbrella of the story is being rushed again because they moved or geographically they moved Metropolis to be next door to Gotham, which I didn't think was a great idea to do. But the Luthor being in Arkham here, just gives you the impression, lends itself to the criticism that others have been seeing about him feeling a bit too Joker like. And his breakout here was just the same, because I'm almost certain there have been instances where the Joker has done that and there's been someone locked into Arkham in his place before. So when Lex typically breaks out of prison, or let me not say break out, when Lex leaves prison, it's usually because he's made himself untouchable. he's used the system or rigged the system in his favor. And that's why Superman hates him so much, not because he's a known criminal, but because he does these criminal things and there's no way to tie any of it to him, because he's just that smart. So for this Lex to take a page out of Joker's book, it just threw me off a bit, but and it lends itself to some of the criticisms that I know he's been getting. And I don't think it needs to. I mean, I think the actor is perfectly capable of being that mastermind, without coming off as the crazy, Joker or Hatter character. So it's a shame that they didn't go that route with him. And there have been speculations, of course, where people have said that perhaps he's Lex's son and he's not necessarily Lex, but I don't think the show has said that there's a Lex, but yeah, I don't think they're hinting at his being that Lex is, he's being some replacement for Lex Luthor. It could be, but I mean that would be a shame as well to remove Superman's greatest adversary, to replace him with his actual son. So I'm not sure why we would go that route. But either way, I think given the right directive, I think the actor could actually play the Lex that we do actually know. But they've chosen to go another way. I don't absolutely love it. I think there are ways in which it could work, but not with him being so Joker-like. I think they need to establish what kind of character this Lex is supposed to be. But he feels he appears to be borrowing elements from different villains and Gotham villains at that, which isn't very Lex-like and not very Metropolis-like. We met Deathstroke, which I suspect means that he's putting together the Legion of Doom, which is, I mean, good. I don't think we've seen the Legion of Doom mentioned anywhere for a very, very long time. Um, it's just funny because the first thing that comes to mind when I think the Legion of Doom is this old cartoon that I usually watch on reruns on, I think, Cartoon Network perhaps. I think it was just like the Justice Friends or something. But the Legion of Doom is just, they're very comical and do a lot of silly things, and at the end of the day they always get caught, but it's just more over the top comical than you expect villains to actually be. So when I hear Legion of Doom, those are the characters that I first think about, and I hope clearly that's not what they're going for here, but that's just my first thought. But they're in the conversation there, that just go back to Joker for a bit. The conversation that the Joker had with Bruce, he spoke about different multiverses and how many of those will you destroy before, because you don't have the guts to kill yourself. So I suspect that is another world. Previously I felt it was a dream, sort of a dream sequence, but it appears to be an alternate universe that Barry traveled to this one to actually warn Bruce of what's to come. So that world is screwed up, and I mean, I spoke before about what DC could do next to kind of course correct, and I suppose this is an opportunity for them to actually do that, because I mean, with them saying, okay, this is a multiverse, they could have a Flash film, which is I think still in the making. They could have Flash's film, correct everything, and then they start anew with the new Batman, Robert Pattinson, which I'm looking forward to. So the Flash's film could actually fix, not, I mean, it won't fix everything, but at the very least give them a new start. Now, as to whether it's too soon for that, I think it's too soon for that. I don't want them to repeat the same mistakes that they've done, which was essentially just rushing forward. They were introducing an evil Superman here. From what we saw in the dream sequence, Lois dies. I imagine Lois dies. But as to why the Joker feels that is Bruce's fault. I'm not sure, unless this Bruce did something different than the Bruce that we followed in this film. But I suppose Lois dies there. Superman blames him, but at the same time, Superman um, appears to be on Darkseid's team. Darkseid came and he placed his hand on his shoulder. I don't know. Is it a situation where reviving Superman using the mother box allows him, allows Darkseid to control him, or is it the anti-life equation? Because then that allows Darkseid to control others. So, um, it's perhaps in that universe, Darkseid obtains the anti-life equation, and he's somehow able to control Superman with it, and Superman, rules Earth alongside Darkseid. So that's interesting. But as I said, if they, as far as what the future of the DCEU is, I do think they will need to let some time pass. Don't repeat the same mistakes. Battinson, allow Battinson to build out his universe. I think they can do a few films, and I'm not even sure whether they plan on redoing the Justice League that soon, but they may just be focusing on just doing their Batman films now, and that would be great. I think they can do another, do this Pattinson's film here, then do a second, then do a third with Joaquin Phoenix's Joker. They don't have to, but that's just my dream for them to tie in Joaquin's Joker with this Batman. I know he's slightly older. Well, he's much older. But there are ways to explain from the Joker's story how he could be. We all know that Arthur in that story is not a reliable narrator, so he could have lied about the age and all of that. So they can write it in, for them to be. And if the Joker is older than he is, I'm fine with that actually, because his Joker is just that good, and I think it's a perfect match for the tone that they're going for with this Batman. So, what they should do, yes, allow some time to pass. As much as I love the Aquaman films, as much as I love the Wonder Woman films, they should use the time to tie those out. Do one more Wonder Woman film in Themyscira. Do one more Aquaman film in Atlantis. And just use the Flash's film thereafter to close out this chapter in the DCEU and start anew. With Robert Pattinson's Batman, and allow him time to explore his rogues gallery, build that up before you consider any additions, because jumping in too early was what caused a lot of the complications with the DCU going off course. So that's my recommendation. I'm somewhat disappointed that that's the direction we're going. I don't think, regardless of what the response is to this Snyder cut, I don't believe that Warner Brothers has any intention of going further with the story, which is unfortunate. But it's sometimes it's good to have new talent come on board. They've seen what works and what doesn't work, I hope, and I think we do need someone at the helm to properly guide, the creative team as far as, what needs to come first, what sequence of events need to happen. With no one steering the ship, you end up with a mess, in the ways that the DCU is as it is currently. There are a lot of good films in it, but there's no direction for any of them, It all just happened. It happened too fast, too soon. As I said, the sequence of events, it should have been Man of Steel. There should have been a Wonder Woman movie. There should have been an Aquaman movie. Then there should have been maybe a Man of Steel 2 with Brainiac or something, and then a Flash movie. And then we go into the Justice League. But the studio is just too preoccupied. They were just too preoccupied trying to catch up, and they kind of shoot themselves in the foot. So here we are. And it's still fresh in a lot of people's memories, so it's gonna have to be some time before they try to do these characters again. And it is a shame, because I think And this is one of the other things I have to give Zach credit for, because aside from the score and the visuals, he's done such a fantastic job with casting. Oftentimes you forget that he cast Gal as Wonder Woman, and Jason as Aquaman. I think the and um, Henry Cavill and Ben Affleck, and all of them in my mind have been perfect casting for the characters that he's wanted to portray. They've been perfect casting. So it's just unfortunate that with these actors and actresses, that we will have to start over with others, and they whoever gets cast in these roles again, man, they will have some giant shoes to fill. They will have giant shoes to fill. I'm going to miss seeing them on screen. I really am. As I said, for Affleck, he's my favorite Bruce Wayne portrayal in live action that I've seen so far. My favorite Batman is still the animated one, but he's definitely up there in BVS. I didn't particularly love his portrayal in Justice League, because he seems to have departed from how he was in BVS. Before. So I would have liked to have maintained that tone that Bruce had in BVS throughout. But we didn't get that. So that's unfortunate, guys. That's unfortunate. So I mean, there is always room. If they apply the same treatment that they have with the Joker, try to tell more contained stories, and allow Pattinson's Batman to build his rogues galleries, then we could see another version of the Justice League, somewhere down the line. I would like to see these characters imagined completely on screen before I die. Okay, I would like that to happen. Um, as far as DC has such a plethora of characters to pull from that they can adapt. So there's just no excuse not to. I know the focus was on the Trinity initially, because they are the most well known. But it doesn't have to be that way. I think they've proven with the Joker that they can tell these other stories, that can or may not tie in later on to something. And I think that should be their focus. I would absolutely love to see, just to stick to the Batman's Rogues Galleries for a moment. I would love to see a Clayface adaptation, in the same vein as Joker, right? It could be, I know traditionally Clayface is usually like a stage actor or something, so they could go that route, or a combination of that and maybe a transgender character or something, to be in line with what the character does. Um, so I mean, there's just a lot of interesting stories that they can actually tell with a lot of Batman's Rogues Gallery. So I want them to go that route, tell more contained, interesting stories. I know they Batman comes off a bit, artsy, highbrow, and not so much the action, high octane, run and gun, energetic comic book stories that we're accustomed to. But look at how successful it's been, and that in part is because of the Joker branding, the Joker name. But I think you can be successful enough telling these small stories, and as they continue to do well, they'll continue to perform as well. So, that is my hope. That is my hope for the story, guys. Yeah. So, I'm definitely curious to know what you guys thought about this film, what you think about the DCEU in its current state, and what your hopes are for them in the future. Do you think they should continue with on the path that they have been, and continue to do other films, or should they try to use the Flash, to sort of rewrite stories and then start over again in maybe another 3 to 5 years and start the story all over again? So, be sure to post down below, let me know what your thoughts are on this. Hit like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys for the next one.